Ladies and gentlemen, today we're diving into a powerful and thought-provoking story that had the entire country talking. When tech entrepreneur Darius Bell appeared on live television, he expected tough questions, but what he got was an attempt to discredit his success. What happened next? His response changed everything. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share where you're watching from in the comment section. Your support will help us bring more meaningful stories like this. Judge Eleanor Hartwell took a moment to adjust the heavy folds of her black robe, settling herself into the high-backed chair that commanded the courtroom. Her sharp, calculating eyes swept over the room, taking in every detail. The polished wood of the bench and rail, the slightly flickering fluorescent lights above, and the hushed murmur of the crowd. The gallery was packed as it often was on a Monday morning, with spectators filling every seat, all eager for the drama that unfolded in her courtroom. But today's case seemed, on the surface, to be just another routine affair. An 18-year-old boy, barely out of high school, accused of armed robbery. The defendant, Marcus Green, stood alone at the defense table, his defiant posture and piercing gaze giving off an air of quiet rebellion. A lanky black teenager with an unkempt mop of hair and an expression that seemed equal parts confident and angry, Marcus was the picture of youthful defiance. His name was Marcus Green, and today his life hung in the balance. He was facing serious charges, and yet his public defender was nowhere to be seen. Judge Hartwell sighed audibly, the sound echoing slightly in the hushed room. She leaned forward, her fingers lightly tapping the wood of her bench. "Mr. Green, where is your attorney?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension as she glanced over at the young man. Marcus straightened his shoulders and met her gaze without flinching. His voice was steady, but there was a hardness in it that told of a mind well set on the course ahead. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The room erupted in a ripple of laughter. Some of the spectators exchanged amused glances, and even the bailiff, standing stoically by the door, couldn't suppress a slight smirk. Judge Hartwell raised an eyebrow and leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into an amused smile. "Who? Representing yourself?" she asked, her voice carrying a mocking tone. "This isn't a game, young man. Armed robbery is a very serious charge. You might want to reconsider." Marcus remained unmoved, his gaze unwavering. "I understand the charges, Your Honor, and I'm ready to proceed." Judge Hartwell took a long, measured breath, her amusement giving way to something resembling intrigue. "Well, this should be entertaining," she said dryly. "Proceed, then." The prosecutor, Richard Caldwell, a slick, middle-aged man with the air of a professional who always got his way, stood up confidently. His tailored suit gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, a reflection of the arrogance with which he approached his job. He cleared his throat and addressed the court in a smooth, practiced tone. "Your Honor, the state will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Marcus Green was caught red-handed in possession of a stolen wallet and a firearm. The victim, Mr. Harold Jenkins, positively identified him in a lineup, and the evidence against the defendant is overwhelming." Judge Hartwell nodded, her expression one of smug satisfaction. "Sounds like an open and shut case to me," she said, casting a glance at Marcus before turning her attention back to the prosecutor. "Mr. Green, do you have anything to say?" Marcus stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. His hands were clasped firmly behind his back, but his presence was commanding, as if he was already in control of the courtroom. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to question the validity of the lineup identification." A murmur ran through the courtroom, and Judge Hartwell's eyebrow arched in mild surprise. She had expected the usual motions, but this was different. "On what grounds?" she asked, clearly intrigued. Marcus turned to the prosecutor, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Caldwell, can you confirm that the lineup was conducted without a lawyer present?" Caldwell hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face for the first time. "That's correct, but—" Marcus cut him off, his words sharp and cutting. "And can you confirm that the victim, Mr. Jenkins, was told by the officers that they had caught the guy before he even viewed the lineup?" Caldwell's face flushed a deep red. his confidence cracking under the pressure. "That's irrelevant. The identification still stands," he muttered, though his tone lacked the previous certainty. Marcus turned back to the judge, his voice steady but forceful. "Your Honor, in the case of United States v. Wade, the Supreme Court ruled that suggestive lineups, conducted without the proper safeguards, violate a defendant's Sixth Amendment rights. This identification is tainted and should be excluded from evidence." The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence. Every eye was on Marcus now, and even Judge Hartwell, who had been so quick to dismiss him, stared at the young man with a new sense of respect, and perhaps a hint of unease. "Where did you learn that?" she asked, her voice no longer dripping with sarcasm. Marcus shrugged, his eyes never leaving hers. "I read a lot." The judge leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable, but there was a shift in the air. A quiet recognition that Marcus was not to be dismissed so easily. "Go on," she said, her tone now more neutral, almost encouraging. Marcus nodded and pressed on. "Next, I'd like to address the so-called firearm in question. The prosecution claims it was found in my possession, but the police report states that the weapon was discovered in a dumpster 2 blocks away from where I was arrested. There's no forensic evidence linking me to that weapon, no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing." Caldwell shot to his feet, visibly rattled. "Your Honor, the defendant was seen fleeing the scene and was apprehended nearby. It's entirely reasonable to assume he discarded the weapon in the dumpster." Marcus shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Reasonable assumption is not the same as proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And since we're discussing assumptions, let's talk about the wallet. The prosecution claims it was stolen, but the victim himself said he left it on the counter at a coffee shop. He didn't even realize it was missing until the police showed up with it. How can that possibly prove robbery?" The gallery erupted into murmurs of surprise and disbelief, and for a moment Judge Hartwell seemed momentarily taken aback. Her gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Order! Order in the court!" she called, her voice demanding control. She turned back to Marcus, her earlier amusement replaced by something deeper, a begrudging respect, perhaps. "Is there anything else, Mr. Green?" Marcus nodded, his expression calm and resolute. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to submit into evidence a surveillance video from the coffee shop. The footage clearly shows the victim leaving his wallet on the counter and walking out without it. The timestamp on the video verifies that I was already in police custody when the wallet was taken." His words echoed in the stillness of the courtroom, sending ripples through the audience. The prosecutor, Mr. Caldwell, visibly recoiled as the implications sank in. His face turned pale and he stammered, "Your Honor, this evidence was never disclosed to the prosecution." His voice faltered, a rare crack in his earlier bravado. If you are still watching this video and found this story helpful, please comment 1 below to let me know you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. A faint, knowing smile tugged at the corner of Marcus's lips. "That's because the police didn't bother looking for it, Your Honor. They saw a black kid in the area, made assumptions, and decided that was enough to pin the crime on me." His words struck with precision, each syllable carrying the weight of years of unjust treatment. A heavy silence descended upon the courtroom, the air thick with tension. The spectators, reporters, and even the bailiff held their breath as Marcus's words hung in the balance. Judge Hartwell, seated at the bench, leaned forward, her hands steepled in front of her face. She studied Marcus intently, her eyes narrowing with curiosity and something else, something like respect. "Mr. Green," she began, her voice steady but with a hint of wonder, "where did you learn to argue like this?" Marcus met her gaze without hesitation, his eyes unwavering. "My mom was a public defender," he replied, his voice firm and confident. "She used to bring case files home and I'd read them cover to cover. By the time I was 12, I was already studying the law on my own. I always knew that someday I'd need to know how to fight back with it. Judge Hartwell exhaled slowly, the weight of his words settling over her. For a moment she just sat there, contemplating the depth of his resolve. She turned to the prosecutor, her expression turning stern. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice sharp, "do you have any further evidence to present in light of this new information?" Caldwell, his confidence shattered, shook his head slowly, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "No, Your Honor," he muttered, unable to meet the judge's gaze. Judge Hartwell gave a small nod, her face unreadable. "In that case, I have no choice but to dismiss the charges against Mr. Green." She raised her gavel, her voice carrying authority. Case dismissed. The courtroom erupted in a cacophony of voices. Reporters surged forward, eager to capture the moment, their cameras flashing, but Marcus stood still, composed and unfazed by the chaos around him. His expression was unreadable, a mask of calm. As he turned to leave, Judge Hartwell's voice rang out, unexpectedly soft. "Mr. Green?" He paused and turned back, curiosity flickering in his eyes. The judge, her tone gentler now, said, "You should seriously consider law school. You have the makings of a great lawyer." There was an almost maternal pride in her voice, but also an unmistakable recognition of his talent. Marcus's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "I've already been accepted to Harvard Law," he said, his voice cool and confident. This was just a warm-up. With that, he turned and walked out of the courtroom, his footsteps steady and purposeful. The crowd parted as if in awe, giving way to him as he passed, some even whispering his name in reverence. Outside, the sunlight seemed brighter, the air heavier with anticipation. His mother was waiting for him, tears welling in her eyes. She pulled him into a tight embrace, her voice barely a whisper. "You did it, baby. I knew you would." Marcus held her close, feeling the weight of her pride and relief. He pulled back slightly and looked over her shoulder at the courthouse, his gaze hardening with determination. "This is just the beginning, Mom," he said, his voice steady and unwavering. "I'm going to change the system, one case at a time." Across the street, from her office window, Judge Hartwell watched Marcus as he walked away. A strange mix of emotions crossed her face, pride in the young man he had become, but also regret for underestimating him in the past. He wasn't just a kid from the neighborhood. He was a force to be reckoned with, and the legal world would soon come to know his name. The news of Marcus Green's courtroom victory spread like wildfire, igniting a nationwide buzz. By the end of the day, his name was trending on social media platforms, his face plastered across every major news network. Clips of his impassioned, eloquent self-defense went viral, drawing admiration from all corners of the country. Headlines like "Teen Genius Dismantles Prosecution in Stunning Courtroom Showdown" and "From Defendant to Legal Prodigy, the Marcus Green Story" dominated the airwaves, solidifying his place in the public consciousness. Reporters camped outside his home, eager to catch a glimpse of the young man who had seemingly defied the odds. They were desperate for a statement, a soundbite, but Marcus refused to speak with them. He wasn't chasing fame or the adoration of the public. His sights were set on something far greater, on a mission to right the wrongs he had experienced. The following week, Marcus found himself sitting in the cramped, cluttered office of a local non-profit organization that specialized in fighting wrongful convictions. His mother, a seasoned former public defender, had introduced him to the organization's founder, Clara Bennett, a tough but deeply passionate attorney who had spent over 3 decades fighting for justice. The moment Clara saw Marcus walk into her office, she knew there was something extraordinary about him. His unshakable confidence, his sharp mind, and the fire in his eyes all spoke to a deep understanding of the brokenness of the legal system. "You've got a gift," Clara remarked as she leaned back in her worn chair, studying him. "But gifts like yours come with responsibility. What do you plan to do with it?" Marcus, without hesitation, met her gaze. I want to help people like me. People who get railroaded by a system stacked against them. People who don't have the knowledge, the resources, or the support to fight back and get justice. Clara's eyes softened slightly. Good answer. Well, we've got a case here that could use someone like you. A young woman named Tasha Miller. She's been sitting in jail for 2 years on a drug charge, but the evidence against her is flimsy at best. Would this be something you'd want to get involved in? Marcus didn't need to think twice. Let's get started. Tasha Miller, just 22 years old, was a single mother of 2 young children, serving a 10-year sentence for possession with intent to distribute. Her conviction was based entirely on the testimony of a single informant, a man with a long history of manipulating the system for his benefit by lying to the police in exchange for lighter sentences. Marcus immediately dove into the case files, devouring the police reports, witness statements, and forensic evidence. He spent hours combing through every detail, looking for inconsistencies. It didn't take long for him to spot several glaring errors that had been overlooked by Tasha's original attorney. A week later, Marcus found himself standing once again in front of Judge Hartwell, this time as part of Clara's legal team. The judge raised an eyebrow as she saw him step up to the defense table. "Mr. Green, I didn't expect to see you back in my courtroom so soon," she remarked dryly. Marcus couldn't help but smile. "I'm full of surprises, Your Honor." The hearing began, and Marcus took the reins. With a calm yet determined demeanor, he methodically deconstructed the prosecution's case, poking holes in their arguments with surgical precision. He highlighted the informant's unreliable history, the glaring lack of physical evidence tying Tasha to the drugs, and the numerous procedural errors that had been made during her arrest. As he spoke, the room fell silent, with even the prosecutor now looking uncertain and uncomfortable. Judge Hartwell, who had initially been skeptical of Marcus's presence, leaned forward in her chair, her earlier indifference replaced by genuine intrigue. When Marcus finished his argument, she turned to the prosecutor with an air of expectation. "Do you have any rebuttal?" The prosecutor hesitated, visibly flustered, before finally shaking his head. "No, Your Honor." Judge Hartwell gave a small nod. "Then I have no choice but to grant the motion for a new trial. Ms. Miller, you will be released on bail pending further proceedings." Tasha, who had been sitting motionless beside her attorney, broke down in tears, her hands trembling as she reached out to hug Marcus. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you so much." Marcus smiled softly but remained composed. This victory was important, yes, but he knew it was only the beginning of something far bigger than himself. There were countless others out there who needed his help, and he was just getting started. Months later, Marcus was packing his belongings in preparation for his next big step, attending Harvard Law School. His acceptance had been a foregone conclusion after his courtroom triumph, but Marcus never took anything for granted. He knew the real work was just beginning. At Harvard, he was entering an entirely new world, one where he would have to prove himself all over again to show that his talents extended far beyond the courtroom and into the highest echelons of legal academia. Once at Harvard, Marcus wasted no time making his mark. He joined the Innocence Project, a prestigious legal clinic focused on exonerating individuals who had been wrongfully convicted, and quickly became one of its most dedicated and active members. His intellect, work ethic, and passion for justice earned him the respect and admiration of both his professors and peers. But despite his growing reputation, Marcus remained grounded, never forgetting where he came from or the battles he had already fought. He knew his journey was far from over, and the real challenges still lay ahead. During his second year as a public defender, Marcus took on another high-profile case, a man named Carlos Rivera, who had been languishing on death row for a staggering 15 years for a crime he had steadfastly denied committing. The story of Carlos's wrongful conviction haunted Marcus. compelling him to take the case with a determination that matched his passion for justice. He spent countless months meticulously investigating the case, delving into every detail, reviewing old files, and tracking down key witnesses who had been ignored or dismissed in the initial trial. What he uncovered was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Crucial evidence that had been deliberately suppressed by an overzealous prosecutor eager to close the case quickly and push for a conviction, no matter the truth. With the weight of the evidence now firmly on his side, Marcus presented his findings in court. It was a tense moment, filled with uncertainty. But when the judge reviewed the new information, it became clear. Carlos had been wrongfully convicted, and his time on death row had been a tragic mistake. The judge made the rare and powerful decision to overturn Carlos's conviction, and at that moment Carlos walked out of the prison gates a free man. An innocent man who had endured 15 years of suffering for a crime he did not commit. If you are still watching this video and found this story helpful, please comment below to let me know you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The case quickly made national headlines, shining a spotlight on the flaws within the criminal justice system. As the media hailed Marcus as a hero, he became a symbol of hope for countless others who had been similarly failed by the system, especially those with no means to fight back. But for Marcus, the attention and accolades meant little. His motivation had never been about fame or recognition. It was always about the people, the Tashas, the Carloses, the forgotten and voiceless individuals who were too often lost in the cracks of a broken system. Years later, Marcus stood at a podium in front of a packed auditorium, accepting an award for his pioneering work in criminal justice reform. As he looked out at the sea of faces before him, he felt a rush of gratitude and humility. Among the crowd were those who had supported him from the beginning. His mother, Clara Bennett, whose unwavering faith in him had kept him grounded through the toughest moments. Even Judge Hartwell, who, despite their initial differences, had become an unexpected mentor and a trusted ally. Justice, Marcus began, his voice firm and resolute, isn't just about winning cases. It's about ensuring that the system serves everyone, not just the privileged few. It's about holding people accountable, especially those entrusted with power and the responsibility to protect and serve. And above all, it's about never giving up, no matter how impossible the odds may seem. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of appreciation for the years of tireless work that had brought Marcus to this moment. But Marcus wasn't done. He held up his hand, signaling for quiet, and continued with a deep conviction that resonated with the entire room. This award isn't just for me. It's for every person who's ever been wronged by this system and didn't have the tools, the resources, or the support to fight back. It's for every lawyer who's gone the extra mile, every advocate who's spoken up, and every ordinary person who's refused to accept injustice as the status quo. This is just the beginning. The fight continues, and we will not stop until justice is truly served. As the applause swelled around him, Marcus stepped off the stage, his heart full of purpose. But before he could leave, he felt a gentle hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Judge Hartwell standing behind him, her eyes bright with pride and admiration. "You've come a long way, Marcus," she said warmly, "and I have no doubt you're just getting started." Marcus smiled, his gaze unwavering. "I know, and I won't stop until the system changes for good." With that, Marcus walked out of the auditorium, his mind already focused on the next challenge. The fight for justice was far from over, but Marcus Green, once just a young man determined to make a difference, was now a force to be reckoned with. His journey had only just begun. The news of Marcus Green's courtroom victory spread like wildfire. By the end of the day, his name was trending on social media, and clips of his impassioned self-defense were playing on every major news network. Headlines like "Teen Genius Dismantles Prosecution in Stunning Courtroom Showdown" and "From Defendant to Legal Prodigy, the Marcus Green Story," eager to get a statement. But Marcus refused to speak to them. But he wasn't interested in fame, he had a bigger mission. The following week, Marcus sat in the small, cluttered office of a local nonprofit that focused on wrongful convictions. His mother, a former public defender, had introduced him to the organization's founder, a grizzled but passionate attorney named Clara Bennett. Clara had been fighting for justice for over 30 years, and she saw something special in Marcus the moment he walked through the door. "You've got a gift," Clara said, leaning back in her chair. "But gifts like yours come with responsibility. What do you plan to do with it?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "I want to help people like me, people who get railroaded by the system because they don't have the knowledge or resources to fight back." Clara smiled. "Good answer. We've got a case that could use your touch. A young woman named Tasha Miller. She's been in jail for 2 years on a drug charge, but the evidence against her is shaky at best. Sound like something you'd be interested in?" Marcus nodded. "Let's get started." Tasha Miller was 22 years old, a single mother of 2, and serving a 10-year sentence for possession with intent to distribute. The case against her was built on the testimony of a single informant who had a history of lying to police in exchange for reduced sentences. Marcus dove into the case file, spending hours poring over police reports, witness statements, and forensic evidence. He quickly found inconsistencies that had been overlooked by Tasha's original attorney. A week later, Marcus stood in front of Judge Hartwell once again, this time as part of Clara's legal team. The judge raised an eyebrow when she saw him. "Mr. Green, I didn't expect to see you back in my courtroom so soon." Marcus gave her a small smile. "I'm full of surprises, Your Honor." The hearing began, and Marcus took the lead. He methodically dismantled the prosecution's case, pointing out the informant's unreliable history, the lack of physical evidence linking Tasha to the drugs, and the procedural errors made during her arrest. By the time he finished, even the prosecutor looked uncertain. Judge Hartwell listened intently, her earlier skepticism replaced by genuine interest. When Marcus concluded, she turned to the prosecutor. "Do you have any rebuttal?" The prosecutor hesitated, then shook his head. "No, Your Honor." Judge Hartwell nodded. "Then I have no choice but to grant the motion for a new trial. Ms. Miller, you'll be released on bail pending further proceedings." Tasha burst into tears, her hands trembling as she hugged Marcus. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Marcus smiled, but his work wasn't done. He knew this was just the beginning. A few months later, Marcus packed his bags and headed to Harvard Law School. His acceptance had been a foregone conclusion after his courtroom victory, but he didn't take it for granted. He knew he was entering a world where he would have to prove himself all over again. At Harvard, Marcus quickly made a name for himself. He joined the Innocence Project, a legal clinic dedicated to exonerating wrongfully convicted individuals, and became one of its most active members. His sharp mind and relentless work ethic earned him the respect of his professors and peers, but he never forgot where he came from. During his second year, Marcus took on another high-profile case, a man named Carlos Rivera, who had been on death row for 15 years for a crime he swore he didn't commit. Marcus spent months investigating the case, uncovering new evidence that had been buried by an overzealous prosecutor. When he finally presented his findings in court, the judge overturned Carlos's conviction, and he walked out of prison a free man. The case made national headlines, and Marcus became a symbol of hope for countless others who had been failed by the justice system. But for Marcus, it was never about the accolades. It was about the people, the Tashas, the Carloses, the ones who didn't have a voice. Years later, Marcus stood in front of a packed auditorium accepting an award for his work in criminal justice reform. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes scanning the faces of the people who had supported him along the way, his mother, Clara Bennett, and even Judge Hartwell, who had become an unlikely mentor. "Justice isn't just about winning cases," Marcus said, his voice steady and strong. "It's about making sure the system works for everyone, not just the privileged few. It's about holding people accountable, including those who are supposed to protect and serve." And it's about never giving up, no matter how stacked the odds seem. The audience erupted in applause, but Marcus wasn't finished. This award isn't just for me. It's for every person who's ever been wronged by the system and didn't have the tools to fight back. It's for every lawyer, every advocate, every ordinary person who refuses to accept injustice as the status quo. This is just the beginning. The fight continues. If you are still watching this video and found this story helpful, please comment 3 below to let me know you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. As he stepped off the stage, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Judge Hartwell, her eyes glistening with pride. "You've come a long way, Marcus," she said, "and you're just getting started." Marcus smiled. "I know, and I'm not stopping until the system changes for good." And with that, he walked out of the auditorium, ready to take on the next challenge. The fight for justice was far from over, but Marcus Green was just getting started. Marcus Green's work didn't stop at individual cases. His victories in the courtroom were just the foundation of something much larger. After graduating from Harvard Law, Marcus founded the Green Justice Initiative, GJI, a nonprofit organization dedicated to criminal justice reform, exonerating the wrongfully convicted and holding law enforcement and prosecutors accountable. The GJI quickly became a powerhouse, attracting top legal minds, activists, and even former judges who believed in Marcus's vision. One of the GJI's first major campaigns was Project Truth, a nationwide effort to review cases where convictions were based on questionable evidence, coerced confessions, or systemic bias. Marcus and his team worked tirelessly, often pro bono, to uncover the truth and give innocent people their lives back. Within its first year, Project Truth helped overturn over 50 wrongful convictions, freeing individuals who had collectively spent centuries behind bars for crimes they didn't commit. But Marcus knew that freeing the innocent wasn't enough. The system itself needed to change. He began lobbying for legislative reforms, pushing for laws that would require body cameras for all police officers, mandate the preservation of evidence, and eliminate cash bail for nonviolent offenses. His advocacy brought him to the halls of Congress, where he testified in front of lawmakers, sharing stories of the people he'd helped and the injustices he'd witnessed. One case, in particular, became a turning point for Marcus and the GJI. Jamal Thompson, a 16-year-old boy, had been sentenced to life without parole for a murder he swore he didn't commit. The evidence against Jamal was circumstantial at best, a shaky eyewitness identification and a coerced confession extracted after hours of interrogation without a lawyer present. Marcus took on the case, determined to prove Jamal's innocence. The investigation led Marcus to a startling discovery. The real killer was a known gang member who had bragged about the murder to his associates. Marcus tracked down witnesses, uncovered hidden police reports, and even found a video that placed Jamal miles away from the crime scene at the time of the murder. When Marcus presented the evidence in court, the judge had no choice but to overturn Jamal's conviction. The case made national headlines, not just because of Marcus's brilliant legal work, but because of what happened next. At the press conference after Jamal's release, Marcus stood at the podium, Jamal by his side, and delivered a speech that would go down in history. "This isn't just about Jamal," Marcus said, his voice ringing with conviction. "This is about every kid who's been failed by a broken system. Every person has been judged by the color of their skin instead of the content of their character. Every family has been torn apart by injustice. We can't keep pretending this is just a few bad apples. This is a systemic problem, and it's time we fixed it." The speech went viral, sparking a national conversation about criminal justice reform. Politicians, celebrities, and activists rallied behind Marcus's cause, and the pressure on lawmakers to act became overwhelming. Marcus's advocacy didn't go unnoticed. Within a few years, he was appointed to a presidential task force on criminal justice reform. where he worked alongside policymakers, law enforcement officials, and community leaders to draft sweeping legislation aimed at addressing systemic inequities. The Justice for All Act, as it came to be known, included provisions for police accountability, sentencing reform, and funding for programs to support formerly incarcerated individuals. The bill faced fierce opposition from some quarters, but Marcus refused to back down. He traveled the country, speaking at town halls, rallies, and universities, building a grassroots movement that demanded change. His ability to connect with people from all walks of life, whether it was a grieving mother whose son had been wrongfully convicted or a police officer who believed in reform, made him a powerful and unifying figure. When the Justice for All Act finally passed, it was a historic moment. Marcus stood in the White House Rose Garden, surrounded by activists, lawmakers, and families whose lives had been changed by his work. As the president signed the bill into law, Marcus felt a surge of pride, but he also knew the fight was far from over. Years later, Marcus returned to Harvard, this time as a guest lecturer. He stood in front of a packed classroom filled with bright-owned law students who hung on his every word. "The law is a tool," he told them. "It can be used to oppress or to liberate. It's up to you to decide how you'll use it." After the lecture, a young woman approached him. She was a first-year law student, the daughter of a man Marcus had helped exonerate years earlier. "Mr. Green," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "you saved my father's life. Because of you, I'm here today. I want to be a lawyer like you." Marcus smiled, a lump forming in his throat. "You don't have to be like me," he said. "You just have to fight for what's right. That's all any of us can do." Marcus Green's legacy wasn't just the cases he won or the laws he helped pass. It was the people he inspired. The young lawyers who followed in his footsteps, the activists who took up the mantle of justice, and the families who found hope in his work. He had started as a teenager fighting for his freedom, and he had become a symbol of what was possible when courage, knowledge, and determination came together. As he stood on the steps of the Supreme Court one crisp autumn morning, Marcus looked out at the crowd gathered to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Justice for All Act. He thought about all the battles he'd fought, all the lives he'd touched, and all the work that still needed to be done. "Justice isn't a destination," he said, addressing the crowd. "It's a journey, and as long as people are willing to fight for it, we'll keep moving forward, together." The crowd erupted in applause, but Marcus's mind was already on the next challenge. The fight for justice was never over, and Marcus Green would be on the front lines until the very end. And that's a wrap. What a powerful story about perseverance, justice, and the impact one person can have on the system. So, what have you learned from Marcus Green's journey so far? What lesson will you take from this and apply it to your own life? Leave a comment below and share one thing you've learned that you're going to bring into practice moving forward. If you like this video, please don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring stories like this. Thanks for watching.